here. So this is the second blog in the series, in the video blog, all about healthy aging and longevity. So before we start, we really should talk more about what aging actually is before we go into lifestyles and what we can do about it. And it's a huge subject and a complex subject in terms of the science. And it's really a taboo subject as well. Not many people really want to discuss aging and the symptoms of aging because it can be frankly depressing if you think about it too long and go too far into the future. But nevertheless, if we're going to think about what we can do to age healthily, it's always a good start or a good point to say what actually is aging. The biological definition of aging is really the gradual change over time of the structure and function of whole organisms and organs, and which generally leads to decline in their function and ultimately increased mortality and death. So that's the depressing definition. But to be fair, we're not alone. All complex biological systems, bar a few, have the same fate at the moment. We all age at different rates, of course. A mouse, maybe 2 years. Humans, 80 years. Southern right whales have been found with harpoon spears in them that indicate that they can be 300 years. Now, the oldest human who ever lived was someone called Jean Calment, who was a French lady who lived until 123 years old. Huge amount of time on that, and that seems to be more or less agreed. That's the natural lifespan of humans. There are very few creatures that don't seem to age biologically. The first one, and most obvious, is microorganisms, or most single-celled organisms. So they really just divide clonally, so they just bud off from each other, basically. So death doesn't really much because they just divide, and they've got two where they're opposed to one before. So it's not really aging in the true sense of the word. So they can just bud and divide and divide and divide. And there is one interesting multicellular organism. It's still, you can just about see it with the naked eye. It's called the Hydra. And it feeds off single-cell organisms. It's got little tentacles. And that is the most complicated organism that doesn't seem to show signs of aging. That is, it's effectively immortal. And that brings us to another point, is what is the definition? What does that mean when I say things don't age? And there is, again, a technical definition to this, to aging. And it is, if the mortality rate doesn't increase after maturation, then you are effectively said to be immortal. So that is, after you're mature and you mate, but you don't degrade and die, you're immortal. It's that simple. So aging affects us at every single level. So it affects us at the whole body level, then at the organ level, and then at the cellular level. And all these are incredibly interconnected, but they all result in the same thing, and that's us going downhill over time. And the obvious question is, why? Why do we all have to go down this route on this journey and cease to be? And this is something I struggled with when I was a kid. I remember thinking, why would I not be able to sustain myself? I just couldn't believe that my body would betray itself, and that it would become so inefficient that it wouldn't repair itself, it wouldn't look after itself, and it would allow me, itself, to die. I thought it was ridiculous. And then, of course, later on, I started to study biology, and then you look at from an evolutionary perspective, which is the first perspective we'll look at, and you go, that's why. What a bummer. But, okay, I understand now. If you're a biologist, you already know all this, but it's just a good reminder and a good story. So that story all revolves around DNA. You've heard of it, deoxyribose nucleic acid. And that's what it all comes down to, this long molecule that's in every cell of your body, and it is just a set of instructions on how to build a body. And that's where all this comes into being. If you've actually seen DNA, you'd actually realise how preposterous, ridiculous this whole system is. You can extract the DNA from some of your cheek cells or some lysis buffer to break the cells open and then put some alcohol in and it will precipitate. And it's just a clear, gooey substance. Very innocuous. But here's the thing. That set of instructions is there to build your body. You see a tree that's slightly different DNA has the instructions to build a tree. That DNA doesn't even know it exists. It's just a molecule. It has no feelings. It doesn't have a sensor. It doesn't have any emotions. It doesn't have a brain. It doesn't have anything. It's just a molecule. But that molecule contains the instructions to build you. It's built you. It's built a body that can think, see, smell, feel emotions. But DNA doesn't care. It's ridiculous. It doesn't even know it's done it. So the other thing is that there's a slightly modified version of DNA in plants, in the trees outside, in the grass, in the microorganisms you see, in your dog, in your cat. They're all there and they're slightly different. Same thing, but slightly different. And they're all fighting for survival. They're all slightly different versions of the same thing, fighting for survival, and they don't even know why. It's not conscious. So next time you wake up and you hear that lovely dawn chorus, what you're actually hearing are these DNA-instructed machines fighting for territory, for mates, and against all the other types of DNA that's out there, just so that it can move on and progress through time. Absolutely nuts. But nevertheless, even though DNA isn't conscious, it's been incredibly sneaky. And every animal out there basically has been used. The DNA has built a body as a temporary housing, just for, in our case, for 40, 50, 80 years, and then we die. But if you have kids, half of your DNA at least will be passed on to another little vehicle in an offspring, and the DNA has won. It's won. It's succeeded in continuing its lineage. And what happens to you or me is that you become redundant. Once you've, maybe there's some evidence that you're important, of course, to raise the child or raise the DNA to help it, give it a push along. The problem is that maintaining our body is very expensive in terms of energy. And everything that keeps us alive, our metabolism, is also very dirty. And unless those repair mechanisms are working very efficiently, we get a small but constant build-up of all these different metabolites or the products of living, and that causes us to die eventually. So, yep, we've been betrayed. DNA helps build us, but it betrays us as well as it moves on. So we are just temporary vesicles. So I've just explained there what DNA does as it moves through and it leaves us abandoned. But really, it doesn't really explain why. Since life started billions of years ago, the ecotope, the environment we live in, has changed beyond all recognition. And the DNA has had to adapt, build slightly different bodies as it's gone on through its journey. And this has been done by natural selection. So if the DNA wasn't suited in your body, wasn't suited to a particular environment, it died. Only the ones that were good and successful in that environment passed on and had children. But because things are changing all the time, then the DNA has to keep itself fluid. It has to keep itself flexible. So it builds bodies that are good for the moment, and we have to constantly adapt, evolve to survive over time. And after we've passed our DNA on, our bodies become expendable because we've done our job. And because it's so metabolically expensive to maintain a body, we start to decline as the DNA abandons us. So next, I think it's important just to have a very quick rundown to continue the depression of some of the effects of aging. And then we'll get on to the more positive stuff that's got to come. I don't want to go into this too much because we all know what they are. And just to say, the most important point is that aging really affects every body system. So from the whole body to the level of organs, then to the level of cells and the biochemistry within the cells. It is all affected by aging, unfortunately. So the end effect, ultimately, is your whole body system operates less efficiently and effectively. There is one researcher who's really put together a short list of what actually causes all these effects, and he's narrowed it down to 7 real categories. And the first one is really mutations. So that's mutations in chromosomes that eventually cause cancer. Just looking at the list here. There are mutations in things called mitochondria. They're the things that are really responsible for producing energy for our bodies and our muscles to work and everything to work. Then there's the junk that builds up inside of cells that can't be really broken down very easily. And then there's the junk, as he calls it, that builds up outside of cells, such as plaques, which can form dementia or atherosclerosis, and what else? And then there's cell loss, so apoptosis. As you get older, your cells actually die off, and there's less of you when you're older. And then there's the other thing, it's the opposite way, cells become too many. They continue to reproduce. Again, that's linked to the mutation with the chromosomes, but causes cancer. And then finally, there's something called protein cross-links. So basically, your body becomes stiffer, your organs become more stiff, less flexible. And so there are the 7 fundamental mechanisms. And these are important because they come through, they're discussed in much more detail in the future blog, which is Hope for the Future. When I think about life, I can't help think of it as a massive joke, to be honest. I mean, look at it like this. The DNA in you has been on a 4 billion year journey. 4 billion years to get into you now. It's changed over time. It's been through hundreds, thousands, millions of different bodies to get into you now, changing over time. The DNA in the tree outside has been on exactly the same journey. The DNA in yeast, in the fruit fly, in the fungus, has been on a journey as well, 4 billion years, and it's made it. It's here now. And the DNA hasn't got a clue. It doesn't know why it's doing it. All this journey through time, for what? What purpose? What direction? There is none. And it's going to carry on when I have children, which I have. I've passed it on. I'm redundant now, and the DNA continues its journey through time to no end. To what end? Nothing. It's preposterous, leaving me to shrivel. Yes. But when you start to look at life like that, you really think, well, it puts a smile on my face because it's so ridiculous, but fantastic and brilliant, because it's made people like you and people like me that are so complicated and so over-engineered, really, just to facilitate this molecule through its passage in time. It's it makes me smile anyway. So this particular blog on aging was probably the most depressing one that I will ever do, but it's just nice to get a grasp on why we do age before we move on to actually the big positive things of what we can actually do to increase our healthy lifespan.